Hey, Beastista here, and welcome to the season wrap up of the WDC Season 2. So before if you haven't watched my final video, you probably should, but, if you did, you would have seen that I ended up becoming the WDC Season 2 champion, which is very exciting. And not only that, I actually was also the regular season champion as well with the best record in the regular season. So, very great season for me, very happy. And actually, it was my first time getting a regular season championship as a single coach. So, really happy, really excited about that. So, the basis of this is I'm mainly kind of just going to discuss a little bit of my team as a whole, some of my decisions, and just kind of how the season went and why it went well, what was good, what was bad, and what I would change. So with that, here is the team I ended up bringing. I made no changes and no trades at all. This was the team I drafted completely as it was. I had a restriction in my draft, as I do pretty much every time. The restriction was Pokemon that were new to the expansions was the theme. However, I didn't want to have too many options, so it's Pokemon that were new to the expansion, so that were not in the base Scarlet and Violet, how that were also not in Sword and Shield at all. And so pretty much new Pokemon part 2, because WDC Season 1 I added only new Pokemon to Scarlet and Violet, and then this is kind of the same idea but with just the expansions. And so that was kind of the idea with this draft. And if you wanted to go over like why I drafted everything, I'm not going to go into too much detail because I do have an entire video on that. If you want to find that video of why I drafted the team as I did, but this is the team that I ended up going with. And so here is, kind of the season. On the right, we have the games that I played and the records, and then the left are the stats. I believe these do not include the stats from the finals themselves, so I'll talk a little bit about that. But you can kind of see a little bit of how many times they brought all the Pokemon, their kills, deaths, and then the tiers. And when I talk about how good a Pokemon is, if they're at a lower tier, I'd more likely to rank them higher than if they were otherwise, because they required less to get them if they are at a lower tier. And so let's just go straight to the worst performing Pokemon of the season, Bastiodon. To the surprise of no one, Bastiodon did not do well for me this season. I did not bring it to a single game the entire season. And that's basically the entirety of it. I strongly considered bringing it, I think, 1 week in particular, and then ended up bringing Okidogi instead. The big issue with the Bastiodon is that if your opponent brings a fighting mon, or has a good fighting mon, if their opponent has a good ground mon, it just ends up not being really worth it, especially because its damage output isn't great. And so it's either kind of forced to be a Terra Hog, which is not great for a very low damaging mon, or you just kind of not bring it, which ended up being the case, especially with the fact that my team was a little bit ground weak in itself. So many times I dealt with Terra Ground anyways. And so with that, let's get into a little bit more interesting of a Pokemon, but not too much interesting of a Pokemon. In this case, it is Ambipom as the next mon. So as you see, I kind of highlight these. What I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight in yellow anytime I brought a Pokemon to and the specific week I brought them, and then it'll be yellow if I just brought them, green if they had a very good performance. And so that's kind of going to be the way I distinguish it. So Ambipom, I brought to the finals. It hit the field, clicked fake out, and I won the game. That's all it did. It attacked once, and it was in the finals, so definitely was impactful. I definitely really liked it against the finals, and if we had a third game in that set, I probably would have brought it again. And if it was a little bit closer, Ambipom probably would have been pretty helpful just with good speed and triple axle doing good damage against my opponent's team. However, I just didn't bring it much, mainly because I had a lot of opponents in which it wasn't the fastest mon. And that's kind of the big weakness of it as a whole, I think, is that its only real good damage is triple axle. And so if triple axle doesn't do good damage, or if it's not faster than the entire team, it's in a very awkward position. And that's kind of the issue with it. Obviously, fake out's very powerful, but there's lots of ways to prevent fake out nowadays. But like I said, it was definitely pretty impactful in this prep, and I felt pretty happy to have it on my team in the finals. Next up, we have Weirdeer as my third worst Pokemon this season. So Weirdeer had a stretch of week 2, 3, and 4 in which it came. The idea, or with those weeks, it was pretty standard sets. I think I did Trick Room. Some of them were like calm mind centric, but overall, none of those times in which I brought it was particularly impactful. Pretty much, all it did was, um, you know, set up Trick Room and die, or set up Trick Room, do a little bit of unimpressive damage outputs, and then kind of get into awkward positions. The one game that I lost week 3, I brought it, so it ended up being pretty bad because I lost one week. I brought it. The other week I lost the only game I brought it, and then the other one it was kind of an unimpactful week too. So overall, not great, but it did seem more useful overall. I did one thing that was really interesting. I had triple intimidate, but I honestly did not bring much intimidate this entire season. It was mainly ended up just being a bluff because most of my mons with intimidate ended up just using other abilities. So, anyways, continuing on, next next on the usefulness tier ended up being Grand Bowl. So Grand Bowl only came twice, so a little bit less than Weird Year. However, there are two reasons why it's higher. One, as you can see, I highlighted in green, it had a very good week in week 3 specifically. And two, it was a D tier, so it being a lower tier, it was a lot less impactful. So the downside of Grand Bowl is I wanted a fairy mon for my Dragon Resist, immunity because of Raging Bolt being one of my mons, and the issue kind of with Raging Bolt being one of my mons, or one of my big mons, was that both of my dragon switch-ins were D tier, and one of them was actively bad. But other than that, I also wasn't super trick room oriented. However, week 3, I think it ended up getting 4 kills and being a very impactful mon. I think it one-shot a Baxcalibur. It did big chunks of damage to an Iron Jugulus. But I think just having access to it was pretty relevant at both making my type chart look a little bit nicer and threatening a pretty powerful trick room mode, because Grand Bowl does have a pretty good attack stat and has a pretty good trick room speed tier. So next up we have Raging Bolt, which probably doesn't look like it should be there even when you look at the stats. I brought it to 7 of my 8 games this season. Actually, well, I think 8 of my 9 I brought it to 8 of my 9 games this season. If you include the week that my opponent ended up not battling, I was going to bring it to that week in week 6, but we ended up not battling, so 8 of the 9. However, one of the big things you can kind of see with it is there was exactly 1 week in which it was green, which means that it was actually well performing. So the red on that week 3 means that I brought it to team preview, but it never saw the field. However, kind of the big issue with it is that Raging Bolt was my only S tier, and as being with my only S tier, it ended up not being particularly useful in a given week. There's no week in which I was very excited about it except that week 4, and the only week that it actually did particularly well was the week I ended up losing, and the only we lost this entire season. And large part of it is because it just didn't do enough in that week. So the reasons why I think Raging Bolt's not great, and that's kind of what I learned this season. I built a large portion of my team with like, oh yes, I'll get a bulky good special attacker that I can pair next with Sinistra, in which I can heal it with the Sinistra, and just a pretty powerful mod. But Raging Bolt has a couple of issues. First, its coverage and move pool is really bad. Basically, almost every week you have just Protect, Thunderbolt, Draco Meteor, and Thunderclap as kind of its main move pool. And then occasionally you can run like a Snarl or like a Volt Switch or an Electroweb. But for the most part, its coverage outside of Electric Dragon is really bad. So this means that it ends up being really awkward in front of fast ground mons, or is really awkward in front of anything that has a Terra Fairy. There was just so many situations in which it's not a great position. So for example, I know in the semifinals against the Colossals, I ended up bringing it, I think, all 3 games that game. And what it did, and the reason why I brought it all 3 games is because I wanted a Pokemon to click Protect. because all my other mons didn't have protect, and so the only use for it was a somewhat bulky mon that I could click protect on because my other mons didn't have protect, so that my Gliscor could just click earthquakes, and and that was all it did. Overall, I was very unimpressed with it. As you can see, it got 6 kills and 7 deaths, which is not particularly exciting for an offensive leaning mon. Obviously, the kill death ratio isn't the most telling with some support based mons. However, this is definitely not a really support based mon. There's very few support moves other than Snarl, and which I think you only brought Snarl maybe once or twice this entire season. But like I said, the big issue with it overall is that it was, as the highest tier Pokemon on my team, it did not perform as the highest tiered Pokemon on my team. I do not. I think it performed like statistically like worse than every single one of my Pokemon that is in a or B tier. The only it performed better than Weirdeer Ambipom, but I don't think it, like, even disregarding tiers, I don't think I would have said it did better than any of the other Mons, even though I did bring in a bunch. I think the only strength with it, like the most relevant strength of it this entire season, was that my opponents prepped a lot to it, so bringing a lot of ways to deal with it. So a lot of fairy terras and ground terras that I could theoretically play around with some of my other mons. So next up is Sinistcha. So it's a little bit awkward that both Sinistcha and Raging Bolt are so low on my favorite Pokemon, and the fact that they were kind of the entire basis of my draft because they were my first and second pick overall, and that was the entire basis of I wanted a bulky mon pair next to Sinistcha. So as you can see, I brought Sinistcha to both finals and semifinals. It didn't see the field at all on either of those, and it did have one really good week one, in which I had a couple relevant kills, and was able to threaten speed control. But overall, like, the issue with Sinistcha, frequently it didn't do enough damage. There was a couple times in which it had some relevant switch-ins. I know week 2 I had some relevant healing with hospitality, but what it ended up being the case was just a lot of my mons ended up not wanting to switch out as much. My team was not as intimidate focused as you would expect with 3 intimidates, so the pivoting ended up not being as impactful in that aspect. And the Rage Powder support ended up not being as impactful as just having a second mon that could do damage. Overall, I was pretty disappointed with it. It kind of, even though having a little bit better move pools than Raging Bolt, I also kind of felt that it kind of had the same move sets as well, which was Matcha Gotcha, Shadow Ball, Rage Powder, Trick Room. And those are kind of, the 4 moves that you want to run on it, and which sometimes you can replace, Trick Room for like Calm Mind or Life Dew. But for the most part, I was kind of, it did not do nearly as much as I'd like. It did actively good week 1. I was pretty happy with it week 2. It was able to help deal with my sit up Okie dokie, which was very good that week. My week 3, it ended up being pretty bad, honestly. And then week 7, it also really just didn't do much other than actually, I think it literally just did nothing. I think it was just in the back one of the games. So like week 7, it didn't see the field. Week 6 didn't happen. The semifinals and the finals, it didn't hit the field. And so basically the final semifinals, week 7, week 6, it didn't do anything. Week 3, it was pretty bad. And then week 2, it did some work. And week 1, it did good work. And so the big issue with Sinistcha is that it was pretty good week 1, week 2, and then ended up not doing anything for the rest of the entire season. So next up we have Arcanine. And so Arcanine was kind of, I'd say better than Sinistcha. It's one of my other A tiers. It was very much hit or miss. So Arcanine was amazing week 1. I think it single-handedly just won me the game. It was a fairly bulky offensive Arcanine with a good Terra type, and I think it basically just swept my opponent week 1, making week 1 exceedingly easy. Week 4 and 5, it did a fair bit of work, and then the semifinals, it also did pretty well. It came into all 3 games, and did some relevant work with some extreme speeds when I wasn't faster than it. However, the big issue with Arcanine was just there was a lot of situations in which I didn't feel like it could come. So as you can see, I ended up not bringing it to week 2, 3, 7, or the finals. In addition to that, it was Arcanine is in this really awkward position where I really feel like you want to lead Rockhead on it a lot of the time, meaning that its Intimidate is not as impactful because you really need that head smash for some damage output. In addition, it really wants to Terra a lot of the time, and that's kind of one of the big issues with it, I think, as a whole. And so Arcanine just didn't come to a bunch. However, it was pretty good when it did come, and that's the reason why it's a higher than some of these. The other ones, it just it always was relevant when I brought it. It just didn't come as much, and it felt awkward in a lot of matchups, especially given the fact that I have somewhat of a ground weakness and my opponents brought a lot of ground types. So next up, we have Greninja. So Greninja is a little bit of a tricky mon to rank this season because Greninja was kind of the definition of high and low mon, in which I brought it a fair bit, actually. I ended up bringing it 6 times this season, 7 if you include the bye that I was planning on bringing it. However, it has 3 great matches. Week 7, I was able to get 5 kills with it in the first 2 turns of game 1. And then in game 2 in the back, and ended up getting some kills. So it ended up being an amazing week 7. Week 8, or not the week 8, the finals, Greninja was immensely impactful, setting up icy wins, being the fastest thing on the field if Trickle wasn't up. And so being able, that was majorly impactful. Not doing great damage, but the icy wind speed control and just that was great. And then week 3, Greninja ended up being really impactful as once again being the fastest mon on either team, and just getting outspeeding with dark pulses and hydro pumps and doing big chunks of damage. However, week 1, the semifinals, it didn't hit the field at all, and week 5 against the Center Scorches, overall it was not a particularly good performance from it. It basically just ended up doing almost nothing. And that's kind of the downside of Greninja. So honestly, going in, I was not expecting Greninja to be great. I didn't really actually want Greninja as my water type. I wanted Empoleon as my water type. And so it was, not quite planned. However, Greninja being the fastest mono team actually did very good work, and I was actually pretty happy with it as a whole. It was a very good pickup and definitely made major impacts on making me be able to, become both the regular season and overall champion, because the week 7 match was a win. I had to win 2-0 in order to become the regular season champion, and Greninja carried me there. And the finals, obviously, it was one of the most important Pokemon. Overall, you can also see in the stats, I got 8 kills and 2 deaths. I think if these stats don't include the finals, you can see that Greninja ends up getting 8 kills and 2 deaths, so really having a really good kill-death ratio. And that kind of just goes with the aspects of, it kind of was the Arcanine situation of, it was either completely useless or amazing, and had just had more amazing matches than the Arcanine did, largely because of his speed tier, but also just water is a good typing overall. Next up, we have Volbeat. So Volbeat was, your stereotypical prankster Tailwind Mon that also has some pretty impactful moves with like Encore, Taunt, Rain Dance, things like that. And Volbeat was pretty overall, kind of what I was expecting, but I was very happy with. It had an amazing week 7 in which it helped with the Greninja sweep. It had an amazing week 2 in which it helped set up the Arcanine that I was talking about earlier, in which Arcanine did amazing work. The semifinals, it did really good. It was one of the most impactful Pokemon. I led it all 3 games in that set, and it was very important to lead, and I was very happy with it. And overall, like it did its job, which was Tailwind, Disruption, and frequently I really like the Tailwind Light Screen, Encore, and then Bug Move set. think it's very powerful. The ability to have taunt and things like that are really impactful. It didn't do much in the finals. However, it did what I wanted to, which was basically trade my Volbeat for the Whimsicott. And that's kind of the idea overall. The only time that I brought it and I didn't see the field was the week 2, mainly just because I didn't feel like I needed the speed control. But overall, I was very happy with the Volbeat at being able to help with speed control, get me in positions where I can get nice, clean kills, and also just you know, Prankster Encore Disruption or Prankster Taunt Disruption is so powerful. In the semifinals, I was able to taunt a Gothitelle, preventing them from setting up Trick Room, which was huge. I was also able to Encore a Palmot, preventing it from locking it into Fake Out, which was also huge, doing really good work. So next up, we have the good boy themselves, Okidogi. Okidogi was quite great this season. So as you can see, I ended up bringing them pretty much every week except for the first week, and then the semifinals I didn't bring it. Okidogi had 2 really amazing performances. Week 2, it was against a Landorus Therian with Guard Dog. It got an attack boost. I was able to just Terra and basically, kind of single-handedly swept that. The week 5, it was also very good in that set, in which we were able to kind of just deal massive chunks of damage to Fluttermane, Iron Moth, Quaquaval, and other things like that with a bulky set. And most other weeks it did pretty good. Ended up not coming that week 7. However, that was just because Greninja kind of just was all I needed. But Okidogi was very impressive as an Assault Vest Mon. Overall, that was kind of its most common situation. Other than that, if I didn't run the Assault Vest, it was likely Citrus Berry or leftovers. Because bulk up, Drain Punch makes Okidogi really hard to deal with. It has a really good bulk, really good stats, and its only thing really its only real downside of Okidogi is that its type is not quite great. It's not bad, but it's definitely not great for my team. Because I would prefer it to just be a straight fighting type. Giving the 4 times weakness to Psychic is definitely a little annoying, and the ground weakness is definitely annoying, especially when you might want to pair it next to a Raging Bolt and an Arcanine, some of my other top tier mons. However, despite the ground weakness, which I would prefer it not to have, it was amazing mon. Toxic Chains, being able to get 50% chance poisons from Poison Jab is great. It has a really good move pull with good coverage and like Ice Punch, Knockoff. It has great fighting moves that, in addition to just Drain Punch, exceedingly well. It pairs really next to Sinistcha, even though Sinistcha didn't come a lot. It pairs really well next to Volbeat at both setting up the light screen in case I'm a bulk upset, so I can get special defense and physical defense. It helps get the speed because it's not the fastest with the Tailwind. It also goes really well next to the Gliscor because Gliscor has that ground immunity and also can normally cover offensively each other pretty well. And finally, we have the best performing mon of the entire season, Gliscor. So, though Gliscor was not my most brought Pokemon, as you can see, I didn't bring it week 3 or 6, and in week 1, even though it was on my team, it didn't come to any of the games. However, it had 5 what I would consider great games. So, currently you can see that Gliscor had 12 kills and 7 deaths. That is not including the finals. In the finals, it got 6 kills and no deaths. So it actually ended up at 18 kills and 7 deaths in the 6 games that it saw the field. In addition to that, it was consistent. Not only was it amazing, it was 100% the most important Pokemon during both games in the finals. Gliscor got 12 kills over the 2 final games. 11 kills in the 2 playoff games. Its ability to not be affected by Intimidate or Charm or other attack dropping moves because of Hypercutter is great. Poison Heal with Toxicorp was relevant, and one of the matches I ended up bringing in. And though Gliscor can be a little bit awkward with the 4 times weakness to ice, and though I felt the need to tear it some amount of time, the typing is also very good in certain matchups. It had the ability to completely wall Thunderous Therian, for example, in the finals, unless they had a Terra Blast. Uh, it had the ability to do really amazingly into the Old English Ice Cube's Sand mode, because both not getting affected by sands and not being neutral to both of those, and then just doing good damage to both the Tyranitar and the Excadrill. Really powerful. Um, Overall, Gliscor is also amazing in the fact that it also had the ability to be more of a support mon with moves like Tailwind and Knockoff and Roost. And so overall, Gliscor was really amazing. Also had the ability to set up. I set up one week with a Swords Dance set in which we were able to do big chunks of damage. So Gliscor was overall amazing mon, and it being a B tier mon makes it even more impressive. Really, like, not only were like my B tier mons great because they were lower tier, they're also, I think, just the best independently of that on top of in addition. And so those are kind of the ideas with those with my favorite mons as a whole. And so with that, here's kind of the breakdown. These mons, they overperform their expectations. Volbeat, like I said, is probably the closest of these three to my expectations, because, Prankster Tailwind is, you kind of expect it to be pretty good. The Okidoki and Gliscor I was expecting to be pretty good, but they ended up being amazing. By far the mons that carried me the entire season. Greninja, I honestly was not particularly happy with it. I've always considered it a pretty bad mon, and it did very good. And this was also on the back of that I frequently didn't even run Protean. I just kept it as Torrent because I like the dark water typing a lot of the times. And with the fact that, don't even use its ability, and it's just the mon as it is, was very exciting. I kind of didn't really mention this. I also had some nice situations which I was able to use banded physical Greninja, and that ended up doing some work actually. So the fact that it's a mixed sector was also pretty good. But like I said, I already talked about all these mons, but these mons definitely overperformed, in which Greninja I was expecting to be bad, and it was actually quite good. Gliscor and Okidoki I was expecting to be okay, and they were amazing. And then Volbeat was, the consistent support mon that you would hope it to be. Next up, we have Sinistcha, Granbull, and Arcanine, which I would say met expectations. Sinistcha maybe could be in the underperformed situation. Arcanine, like I said, Arcanine did very good, but was kind of an awkward bring a lot of the times. Granbull, because it's a D tier, I think I was very happy with how good it was. It came to 2 matches and was really great in one of those. So, like, that's kind of all you could really hope for in your D tier. Sinistcha, came for a couple, was supportive, but definitely did not, carry as much. It did not show the strength of it as a mon as much as I'd like. Next up, we have under expectations, under meta expectations. Raging Bolt, honestly, devastatingly poor. Very disappointed as a whole. It was a very bad S tier mon from my perspective. It came to a lot of the matches. It came almost every single week. However, it just, most of the time, it came for one game. I realized it was bad and then switched it out for game 2 and 3. Ambipom, it was a D tier. I kind of did some stuff. It came once, was impactful. I was very I would have brought it multiple, to game 3 if there was a game 3 in the finals. And then Weird Deer, similarly, it was never super impactful, but it came to a fair amount, and I was pretty happy to have it as an option a couple times, including I almost brought it to the final match. Definitely strongly considered it. And finally, we have Bastiodon, which is completely useless. So those are kind of the breakdowns of the mons. And now we go into the final thoughts. So overall, my team didn't feel smooth despite performing well. That's kind of the first thought. I honestly did not feel like my team was good a lot of the season. I felt like it was really awkward prepping. I feel like I had a really awkward speed tier. I feel like I had a lot of mons that really encouraged me to Terra. Kind of going to my second point on this, which my team had a lot of Terra Hogs. I had Arcanine, I had Gliscor, and I had Okidoki that all had 4 times weaknesses. In addition to that, kind of my 3 of my big core mons, which was Arcanine, Raging Bolt, Okidoki, all shared the ground weakness, which is really awkward. And so I really kind of needed the Terra to be able to prevent one of those from dealing with ground types. And there was many games in which I kind of had all three of those because I really needed them for offensive coverage, and I just didn't have switch ins because of that. Obviously, some of this could have been mitigated by having Sinistra on the back. So maybe maybe this is part of me performing poorly, but I definitely felt like it was definitely a little bit awkward on a lot of these games because of that. Kind of going to my other thing, which was my ground weakness is very bad. So yeah, there was multiple times in which I had those three mons, I had no switch ins, and my opponent had something like Terra Ground Moltres with Terra Blast, which made me in a really awkward position. Or a lot of situations like that. My opponent had Terra Blast, Terra Ground, Tinkaton in the final. I had to deal with Extra Drill and Tyranitar with both having ground coverage, and overall, you know, uh, I felt like it was very awkward for me to try to make pivots with a lot of my team, and a lot of the time in which a reasonable pivot mom could have been would have been Sinistra. It ended up being a position where I just didn't feel like it was good enough to bring because it was getting one shot by a lot of the relevant Pokemon. So next up, I've already kind of mentioned it. Raging Bolt is super overrated as an S tier. Though I brought it a lot, I think it's a powerful mon in the general sense. It just does not give enough diversity, and it can be easily prepped around in a draft format. And very frequently, even though I had it on my team in a given week, I didn't feel like it was worth bringing, or I very quickly realized it was bad to bring. And definitely not as much diversity. In addition, we have that bulky offensive mons with 4 times weakness are very powerful in a Terra format. So this was, I have Gliscor, Okidogi, and Arcanine, all that have 4 times weaknesses, all physically leaning. And they are all very powerful options, but kind of going to my second point, which was I have a lot of Terra Hogs. Because of the 4 times weaknesses, they all kind of sort of like tearing. In addition, 2 of them share ground weaknesses. All 3 of them are neutral to water. And so definitely a little bit awkward on the typing for those specifically. And so that definitely a little bit awkward, but being able to tear out of that 4 times weakness, for example, Gliscor frequently had Terra Water, so that didn't take that ice damage. Arcanine frequently was able to do something like Terra Grass to take that ground and the water. And then Okidoki frequently was able to do like Terra Flying or like Terra Ghost to get like solid neutral typing. And being able to tear out of those weaknesses was very impactful, especially since all 3 of those are fairly bulky mons that also just have massive damage output. So it's really hard if you're able to get a turn where you Terra and your opponent can't hit you with a super effective move, and you can do something like Head Smash with Arcanine, Earthquake with Gliscor, Drain Punch with Okidoki, you can get in a really advantageous position. And so I definitely think that's one of the strengths of my team was just I have a lot of mons that put you in a really awkward position where you have to hard read that I'm going to Terra, and if you don't make that read, and I do Terra, you kind of in a losing position. And if you make that read and I don't Terra, you also are in a really awkward position because they can do so much offensive damage to threaten you, and they have such notable typings that it's very obvious what you would attack them with if they don't Terra, and I'm able to kind of get a Terra type that makes it really difficult to make that decision. And I definitely think that's kind of one of the biggest strengths of my team, in which the other aspect of that is I think my team gave me the ability to just do consistent prep, low variance Pokemons, and just using the Pokemon strengths that led to the success. So the idea with that is Gliscor, Terra Water every time, frequently, either having something like an Assault Vest or Expert Belt or, a Resist Berry. Okidoki, Assault Vest almost every single time. If not Assault Vest, it probably means I'm going to have some sort of Protector or bulk up in which I'm able to run something like Leftovers. Raging Bolt, pretty much every week, the exact same set, just basically depending on whether I wanted boost energy or a Resist Berry. And that was, being able to do that means that I'm able to put myself in the position where I can deal with most things my opponents can bring, and I don't try anything spicy that might be really crazy. I think my only really spicy tech was the Choice Specs Rain Dance uh, Surf Greninja Week 7. That was my only super spicy tech of the season. But I think overall, just kind of getting consistent prep and being well, like I said, I think the big strength of my team is that I have good offensive mons that are pretty bulky. And when you are in a position where I can tear them at any moment and you have to make hard reads, and neutral damage never kills those Pokemon because they're so bulky, makes it really hard for my opponents to deal with. And then obviously, with consistent low variance prep, I think I was able to put in a position where it was very much focused on me just outplaying my opponents rather than trying to trick them. And obviously, I'm not saying I'm the best coach in the league. However, I would rather be in a position where it's me needing to play well than me having to make a hard read of what my opponent's going to bring and make major bold reads. And so with that, I just like to end the video with some final things, which are thank you to Matrix, coach of the Welsh-Lade Warlords, Miss Mac, coach of the Miss Magical Marauders, and Solner, also known as Chad, coach of the Shenandoah Sun Warriors. All three of these consistently talked with me, helped discuss, my thoughts and team ideas, and frequently had a little bit of look on my prep. On my prep channel, and either gave me some advice throughout the season, or actively even helped me prep in some of these more challenging weeks. Even though Miss Mag betrayed me and helped my opponent in the finals, super helped team build for Brave in the finals, I still will put you on my final thanks because I appreciate you helping me for the other 8 weeks. Thank you so much to them, and then also anyone else who watched the season and enjoyed the videos. This was a great season. I hope everyone in the WDC overall enjoyed the experience. I had a lot of fun. I was very happy with being able to get there. I appreciate y'all three specifically for helping, but also I hope everyone enjoyed the season, enjoyed this video if you watched to the end, and I'll see y'all to the next season. Thanks for watching.